This is the second video in my Rebuilding Tortuga series. In this video, you're going to see the boat moved from the boatyard where it was when I found it to my home. And then it was moved again to a local boatyard a mile or two from my house where the Chrysler Crown engine was removed, and I got started on my first project on the boat that I did, which was recanvassing the cabin top. I hope you enjoy the video. After we closed the deal on the purchase of the boat, it took about 10 days to line up a hauler to move the boat from the Doug Highland boatyard back to my house where I intended to keep it to work on it. Finally, I managed to schedule September 18, 2007 as the day to move the boat. Fortunately, it dawned as a beautiful sunny day. I went over a little bit ahead of the hauler so that I could take the green cover off the cabin house and make sure all the opening windows and everything were taped down so that they wouldn't fly open during transportation. The hauler showed up about an hour after I got there and proceeded to load the boat. This picture shows the boat right after he loaded it as he's starting to come down the grade. The boat was sitting on a fairly significant downslope, and the bow was blocked up about 3 feet in the air where the stern was only maybe 10 inches off the ground. So it took him a while to get the boat onto the trailer, but once he did, we were ready to go. The hauler moved the boat down the slope and into the boatyard proper. At that point he stopped, lashed the boat down onto the trailer so that it wouldn't move, since we were going to be towing it about 50 miles over the road, and put the wide load signs on, and we were on our way to my house where the boat would sit for the next 4 years. An hour and a half later, the boat was blocked in my yard in front of my house. The boat is on the lawn, not on the gravel pad next to it, because I used the gravel pad back then to store my sailboat for the winter. So I had a new boat, and it was home in my yard, ready for me to begin work on it. This picture shows the port side of the boat in my yard. You can see the shape of the cabin house, which wasn't very evident before because of the green cover, with a slightly sloped forward side, and then 3 windows, then an open area behind with an overhanging cabin top and canvas in the back. When I was on the boat before I bought it, the entire aft end of the house was enclosed with plastic windows, but I felt that I needed to remove those to transport the boat over the road, since we would be hitting speeds of 55 miles an hour, and I didn't really know how well the canvas would hold up. A few days after the boat got home, I made an arrangement with a local boatyard to take the boat over to their yard and remove the Chrysler Crown engine from the boat. In the end, this would be one of 2 things that I contracted to have other people do during my refit. As soon as the boat got into the yard, I went below and disconnected the engine, disconnected the fuel lines, disconnected the transmission linkage, split the propeller coupler, and unbolted the engine from the mount. So it was just sitting in there ready to move. While I was waiting for the yard personnel to come and take the engine out, I decided to start work on the cabin house because it had rained the night before, and I discovered that the cabin top, which had showed no signs of leaking while the boat was sitting with its cover on it, had leaked like a sieve. When I climbed up and looked at the painted canvas cabin top, I could see that the paint had cracked and had split the canvas, and it was basically not providing any protection from the rain. So this is what the cabin top looked like when I started work on it, and now we'll move on and see what happened as I stripped the canvas cabin top off and put a new cabin top on. I started the project by removing the handrails and name boards. Once they were off, I took my utility knife and cut around the perimeter of the canvas roof right next to the trim and started pulling the canvas off. In some places it just lifted off, other places it was firmly adhered and took a lot of effort to pull off. But after about an hour of pretty hard work, I had all the canvas off and had collected all the paint chips that had come off with it. The next step was to remove the trim around the edges of the cabin top. I was very careful not to damage the corners and the curved pieces at the forward and aft ends of the house. The pieces on the sides I didn't worry about so much because I could easily replace them since they were not curved. So here's the cabin house with the canvas off. You can see the tools I used, which wasn't much: screwdriver, a couple putty knives, hammer, and a utility knife. Before I could put the new canvas on the cabin top, the yard pulled the engine. Unfortunately, I wasn't there when it happened. I just came by the next day, and there was the engine sitting next to the boat. This picture shows the old Chrysler Crown flathead 6 gasoline engine sitting next to the boat. This engine weighs over 1,000 pounds, so I must have been quite a project to get it out of the boat, since it was mostly underneath the cabin top. Here's another picture of the engine showing a little bit more of just how big it is. The forward end of the engine is on the left, and then you can see the head there with the 6 spark plugs. Toward the camera from the head is the heat exchanger and exhaust manifold and the exhaust elbow, and then down below that a very large transmission. This is a picture of one of the mounting flanges for the engine. I don't know if you can see it on here, but there's a date. It's January 22nd, 1948. So this engine was at that point almost 60 years old. It was older than I was, and I'm pretty hard to get parts for, so I figured the engine would actually be worse. So it was a good decision to get rid of the engine. My wife, however, had prohibited me from bringing the engine home and having it sitting in the yard. So I arranged with the local machine shop to donate the engine to them, so that it would just disappear from the boatyard and from my life. As soon as the engine was out of the boat, the yard transported the boat back to my house, and I got to work on the next stages of the project, which involved 1, cleaning up the space where the engine had been, and finishing the cabin roof. This picture shows the spot where the engine was. The dark area in the center is basically because the wood is completely covered with oily grime, in some places up to 1 inch thick. Before I started cleaning out the engine space, I had another project to get to because I had no canvas on the cabin top, which made it very leaky. So I got back to that. I started that project by going over the cabin top and removing any damaged or rotted wood, filling any holes, and then put canvas on. I stretched a new piece of canvas over the cabin top and held it in place by nailing it on with copper ring nails around the edges. Once the top was on, as you can see in this picture, I put almost a gallon of satin finish oil-based paint on top of it to seal it up. Once the canvas was installed and sealed, I put the trim pieces back around the edge, reusing the corners and the curved fore and aft pieces, and fabricating new trim pieces for the sides of the cabin house. I screwed those on with bronze screws, bunged the holes, and trimmed the bungs, and sanded everything flush. Was at that point ready to paint all the trim and reinstall the handrails and the name board. By the end of October, I had completed my project of redoing the cabin roof. Before I put the handrails and name boards back on, I stripped them, stained them, and re-varnished them with 8 coats of Epiphane's gloss varnish. Put 3 coats of paint on all the trim, and the cabin top was complete. So at this point, at the end of October, a bit over a month after the boat was delivered to my home, I had had the engine removed and had recanvassed the cabin top. And I was feeling pretty good about the project at this point. Oh, incidentally, you can see my sailboat sitting next to the Tortuga because the end of the season was upon us, and part of the time in that month was spent sailing and then getting the sailboat hauled and brought over to my house. The next video is going to show the work I did in the engine room to clean it up and get it ready for the installation of a new engine. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I should have the next one up in a day or two. So if you want to find out about it as soon as it's up, subscribe to my channel. And if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. And I hope you enjoyed it.